He murdered his own 7-year-old son, leaving his son's body on the child's bed next to a Bible.
You may know pro wrestler Chris Benoit murdered his wife's 7-year-old son earlier this week in suburban Atlanta. Benoit.
Drugs to many patients, including pro wrestler Chris Benoit, has received a 10-year prison sentence. Prosecutors said at least 2 of Aston's patients died.
News of Chris Benoit's murder of his wife Nancy and their young son Daniel, and then his own suicide, dominated airwaves in the summer of 2007. Benoit changed the course of wrestling forever on the heels of his heinous actions. WWE implemented several changes to its company in the wake of the tragedy, some having to do with the wellness of its talents and the use of steroids. The most important change WWE made, though, was to its creative. Post-Benoit, the image of pro wrestlers was at an all-time low in the eyes of the public.
A lot of the professional wrestlers are saying this today, that it's rampant with steroids, and a lot of young men under 50 years old are dying prematurely.
This forced McMahon to turn John Cena into the superhero character he became from 2008 to 2013, otherwise known as Super Cena. This version of John Cena was everything you want in a man and the face of a company. He never backed down in the face of adversity and always triumphed thanks to his beliefs in hustle, loyalty, and respect. Cena also did tremendous charity work, becoming a face of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. On the other hand, a lot of die-hard wrestling fans hated this version of Cena, which led to a decline in fan interest of WWE. In a lot of ways, Chris Benoit ruined wrestling. I spoke about this idea in a video already. I'll link that in the description, and I encourage you to check it out if you haven't yet. Benoit wasn't the only reason why WWE cleaned up its image by deciding to go PG. Linda McMahon, wife of Vince McMahon, was embarking on a political career around the time of July 22, 2008, which would be the day that WWE officially went PG. Linda ran for Senator of Connecticut throughout 2009 and 2010. And surely her political career would benefit greatly from WWE toning down on the raunchy television of the late 90s and early 2000s. Linda made it far in her political endeavors, eventually being elected to President Trump's cabinet in 2016. But at what cost was that to WWE in terms of their creative? It was detrimental in that aspect. The PG era was largely filled with awful television for over 10 years. The transition period in 08 and 09 was fine, and WWE post-Tribal Chief has been superior. But those years in between, from 2010 to 2019, were bad, bro. There was one other main reason for WWE going PG: the sponsors. Honestly, sponsors might have led to WWE going PG anyway, so the Benoit tragedy and Linda's politics might not deserve any of the blame. The creation of the Super Cena character is more to blame on Benoit than the actual PG era. If it weren't for the PR hit wrestlers took post-Benoit, WWE may not have gone so extreme with this good guy Cena character. WWE is at the mercy of their sponsors since becoming a publicly traded company on the stock market, meaning they legally have to do what's in the best interest of the company's shareholders, even if it comes at the expense of their fan base. So at some point, WWE would have had to bend the knee to the sponsors. However, in recent years, WWE has shown that they can attract sponsors outside the family-friendly ones like Coke and Mountain Dew and Snickers. WWE now is sponsored by vodka, so yeah, perhaps it is a combination of all 3 of those factors that forced WWE into moving into the PG era. Perhaps attracting ultra family-friendly sponsors was also in response to the bad PR from the Benoit situation. But let's focus on what was actually on screen for a moment. The PG era was bad for a lot of reasons. For example, oversaturation of content. This era saw the advent of 3-hour Raws and 8-hour pay-per-views. Creatively, the company was stale. It was like they did a complete 180 from the Attitude Era days. It was so kid-friendly that it was too cheesy, and kids didn't even want to watch wrestling anymore. And then at some point, it just became about the psychotic old man Vince booking whatever he wanted to see, regardless of it driving away viewers and record numbers. As time goes by, I feel like wrestling fans, mostly internet fans, have glorified certain aspects of the PG era that weren't that great, but only stood out because of how bad the product was on a year-by-year basis. And I feel like the PG era is actually worse than you remember. I was doing a deep dive into it, and man, there was so much bad stuff going on.
Brock Lesnar!
WWE was so bad for so long that nowadays they pack out arenas and regularly break profit records solely by putting out solid content. I don't think the content of today's WWE is as good as the Attitude Era or even the Golden Era, but it sure is nice to have a good product again. These past 2 years since Triple H took over actually makes the PG era look worse than I remembered it being. And I can't believe I spent so much time throughout the years watching WWE religiously, I guess with hopes that it would be as good as it was during my childhood. The reality is that if Vince was still around, it'd be just as bad. Thankfully, things are looking great since merging with TKO, and Nick Khan and Triple H firmly in charge at the top. Join me today as I walk you through a memory lane of some of the PG era's worst moments, while addressing some of the good moments of the era. For this video's purpose, I'll consider the PG era over after Vince retired. I know WWE is still technically rated PG, but let's be honest, nothing about the final boss Rock and the Liv, Rhea, and Dominic storyline is PG. Prior to WWE turning PG on July 22nd, 2008, the content of the shows had already been toned down somewhat in comparison to what we saw in the 90s and early 2000s. We did see some craziness from 05 to 07, like Vince feuding with God and the absolute insane storylines between various female talents and the Mr. McMahon character, but overall things were toned down a tad bit. People may forget that when the Benoit tragedy struck, WWE was in the middle of a pretty crazy storyline where Vince's limo blew up and he died. That's right, Mr. McMahon, his character, actually died live on Raw, and they struck an investigation into it and everything. They actually went as far to show tribute graphics to Vince McMahon's life before Raw. I know most of you remember this happening, but it might be forgotten that this happened literally 2 weeks before Benoit killed himself and his family. I know I forgot about that. Apparently this storyline was supposed to be Vince faking his death and aligning with Mr. Kennedy, just another of many failed Mr. Kennedy pushes. So after the McMahon death storyline was scrapped, thanks to Benoit, WWE made some drastic changes like reducing chair shots to the head and less blood, before outlawing it altogether once they went PG. Blood would make rare occasional appearances throughout the era, like when Brock Lesnar beat up Randy Orton and made him bleed the hard way at SummerSlam 2016. This was not at all the headline-grabbing, media attention-seeking storyline WWE hoped it would be. The highlight of this is Chris Jericho confronting Brock backstage for thinking he stiffed Randy. Now for the rest of 07 and the first half of 08, we got Cena versus Orton, more Batista versus Undertaker, and Edge being a slightly toned down slimeball from his days engaging in celebrations in the middle of the ring with Lita. But still, he was a slimeball. When WWE officially went PG in the summer of 08, things weren't that bad at first. We were still gifted with the icon known as 2009 Bald Orton. He kissed Stephanie McMahon in the ring and had his house broken into by Triple H, which led to Triple H being arrested to end Raw. There were crazy storylines like Edge cheating on Vicky Guerrero and the very real storyline of Jeff Hardy and CM Punk, where they spoke about Jeff's issues with sobriety. For all intents and purposes, 08 and 09 were good years for WWE. 08 in particular, I think is a great year and is one of my favorites as a fan growing up. Then things went downhill in 2010. This is the year where you started to feel the effects of the PG era. The Raw guest host era was in full form, which gave us segments like Hornswoggle confronting Mike Tyson and Jerry Springer addressing WWE superstars' most intimate relationships. Kelly Kelly said how Santino couldn't finish the job in the bedroom, and then Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler both thought they were the dad of Kelly Kelly's baby. Jerry Springer had the line of the century when he told Jerry Lawler, quote, "You usually pick up your girls during recess."
Isn't she too old for you?
Well, she's borderline.
No, you usually pick up your girls during recess.
Easy now, Jerry.
Wow, 2010 was a wild time. Literally the most exciting part of this year was when Nexus hijacked Raw. Of course this led to nothing as Cena squashed Nexus at SummerSlam in classic LOL Cena wins fashion. This year did see the end of Shawn Michaels' career as well, so that was one less talented legend to go around. 2011 was shaping out to be pretty awful. It started with Del Rio winning a 40-man Royal Rumble, and then Edge broke his neck, which forced him to retire. On top of that, WrestleMania 27 was one of the absolute worst manias of all time. Cena was Super Cena again after he won the WWE title from The Miz, and then everything changed. Going into Money in the Bank 2011, it was looking like a random CM Punk versus Cena match would be the headline, and then CM Punk did this.
That maybe this company will be better after Vince McMahon's dead, but the fact is, it's gonna get taken over by his idiot.
The pipe bomb changed wrestling forever, and was probably the highlight of the PG era. Either that, or maybe Undertaker's streak being broken. Punk's pipe bomb was fresh and exciting. It blurred the lines of reality and fiction in a way we had never seen before. It made Punk a star, and surely WWE couldn't screw this one up. The summer of Punk as it became known brought wrestling fans back in droves. Punk's merch was hotter than ever before, as he was even selling more than Cena during this time. We were watching Punk tear Vince or Triple H to shreds every week with the angst about what would happen next. It felt like WWE was back. It felt like a new era was upon us, one led by CM Punk. And then Punk lost his title to Del Rio and returned to WWE after a short break with new theme music. When he returned, he felt just like another wrestler. And then for good measure, Triple H beat Punk clean for absolutely no reason at Night of Champions 2011 to finish off Punk's newly found momentum for good. Now this brings me to a major point of contention: CM Punk's 434-day title reign. He won the WWE title at Survivor Series 2011 and lost it at Royal Rumble 2013. In some people's minds, this was the best title run of the era, and of all time. While it may be in contention for the best title reign of the era, it certainly isn't amongst the all-time great reigns. I actually think Punk's 434-day title reign wasn't that good at all, in hindsight. For one, he hardly main evented pay-per-views, and he really didn't have a memorable feud with anyone over the title. The Chris Jericho feud was good and had some controversial moments, like when Jericho poured beer over Punk, but the storyline wasn't good enough to headline WrestleMania. And I mean, yeah, it was competing with Rock vs. Cena, but regardless, it isn't remembered fondly. Outside of that, Punk feuded with Daniel Bryan. They had good matches, but they too were on the undercard to John Cena versus John Laurinaitis. That's just gross. Then there was the triple threat match with Punk, Cena, and Big Show at SummerSlam, followed by a pretty boring feud with Ryback that headed into 2013, which did lead to the debut of The Shield. In all honesty, I'm struggling to find a significant moment or signature feud for Punk's 434-day title reign, which is a sign of it not being that great or memorable, just for me in my opinion. Sure, he had good promo segments with the like of Cena and The Rock. The one where he tells Rock his arms aren't big enough to box with God is absolutely iconic. I just don't think that reign was as good as, say, Roman's Tribal Chief run, or 2007 Cena, or 05 Batista. I feel like it is remembered so fondly because it stood out as something that was pretty good during a time frame where most of wrestling was bad. While we're on the topic of WrestleMania 28, let's talk about Cena and Rock's feud. Their 2012 once-in-a-lifetime feud was the most culturally relevant WWE was during this era, as this was a peak of the PG era, until they made it twice in a lifetime. By the time we got to 2013, nobody wanted to see Cena versus Rock again. It was a mess. The feud was stale, boring, and predictable, and Rock even got hurt minutes into the match. The crowd was booing, P. Diddy was the host of the show, which I look at completely differently now. However, WWE had an opportunity to give us something fresh and great, centered around Punk yet again. It could have been Punk versus Rock at Mania 29, and maybe I'd be talking about this whole era differently, who knows. But instead, Vince sacrificed whatever was left of Punk's elite level star power to give us Cena versus Rock again. The silliest part about this was just the fact that WWE went back on their word of Cena versus Rock being once in a lifetime. It made the past 2 years filled with throwing away WrestleMania 27 to promote 28 feel like it was for nothing. The great promos between the two, Cena burying Rock during radio interviews, all of it. The epic stare down at 28 all felt wasted after they just ran it back again in predictable fashion. Overall, 2013 was forgettable, aside from the rise of Daniel Bryan, which didn't really go into full effect until 2014, which is arguably the best year of the entire era. I'm not going to bore you and do a year-by-year breakdown, but this one is important to focus on for a minute. One of the most important butterfly effects in wrestling history occurred in 2014, when Punk walked out of WWE, which led to Bryan being inserted into the main event of WrestleMania 30. The Yes Movement became so undeniable that WWE had no choice but to run with Bryan at the helm. Then he got hurt. Bryan's reign was over before it even got started, as he was out of action for the better part of 2014, shortly after winning the WWE title. He would make his return at WrestleMania 31 before getting injured again shortly thereafter and retiring for a few years before returning again in 2018. Now, if Bryan and Punk were both around throughout the height of this era to mix it up with The Shield and other top stars like AJ Styles, maybe things would have shaken out differently. It's glaring that WWE has suffered from the losses of big stars like Michaels, Edge, Punk, and Bryan, and they were all within a few years of each other. Regardless, 2014 turned into an epic year for WWE. We had one of the greatest WrestleManias of all time, a great rivalry between The Shield and Evolution, Sting's WWE debut, and The Shield breaking up, creating new single stars, just to name a few. It was clear the future was now, with Dean Ambrose, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins going their separate ways. And And along the way, we did get some goofy segments like Ambrose wheeling a hot dog cart out and squirting people with mustard live on Raw. Yeah, we had to take the bad with the good. And while WWE was still a chore to watch at times throughout 2014, I still think it sits firmly at the top as the best year of the era. 2015 probably did more harm than good for WWE in the long run. I say that because of the Royal Rumble and WrestleMania, but for completely different reasons. Royal Rumble is when Vince started to show his old age and stubbornness. We got an idea as fans just how out of touch with creative Vince was when he forced Roman Reigns down our throat at the Royal Rumble. Roman won the Rumble match while the fans layered choruses of boos onto him. It was so bad that The Rock even got booed when he came out to make the save on his cousin.
It's all about WrestleMania! Yeah!
Easily the worst Rumble match of all time. This had fans in an outrage, mostly because we rejected Reigns as the hand-picked corporate top guy. In years past, when WWE had corporate hand-picked guys on TV that weren't connecting with the audience like Orton and The Rock, they pivoted and altered the guys' characters. Now we saw Vince's stubbornness as he shoved Reigns down our throat for the better part of the next decade, until finally altering Reigns' character in 2020. On to WrestleMania. WrestleMania 31 ended up being one of the 15 greatest events in the history of the show. However, the build was awful with a capital A. The build up to Mania 31 is probably still one of the worst we've ever seen, if not the worst. Roman and Brock had a literal tug of war over the Universal Championship or WWE title, whatever belt it was. And the only thing notable from the build to Orton versus Rollins was Orton flipping off the crowd randomly on Raw. I remember the go-home Raw to the show felt so lazy. It just didn't feel like a go-home show for WrestleMania. This created a formula WWE basically used until Vince was out the door for good. A formula of lazy booking leading up to Mania because the brand of WrestleMania sold itself. So why try, I guess? The build-ups for WrestleMania just started feeling great again this year thanks to Final Boss Rock and all that came with that. I know some of you will hear me label 2014 as the greatest year of this era and go, hold on, wait a minute there, pal. What about 2016? See, 2016 is another point of contention for me. I feel like it's highly overrated. I've seen fans, YouTubers, and media personalities all talk about how great of a year 2016 WWE was, and I just don't see it. I mean, there is no denying that SmackDown Live in the fall of 2016 was great post-draft, under the leadership of Shane McMahon and Daniel Bryan. Raw was fun at times with the list of Jericho, and while those segments were great, and they were, there was still 2 hours and 40 minutes of a lackluster show in between. Let's be honest, Kevin Owens' title reign wasn't that good, and I know part of that is because he lost it to Goldberg, which is a conversation for another day. Kevin Owens' title reign felt like a byproduct of WWE fans complaining on social media for their favorites to win, and that also became commonplace after what the Yes Movement did. Not to mention, Owens was a fill-in after Finn Balor got hurt the same night he won the Universal title against Rollins at SummerSlam. This is probably the moment in time when Vince stopped listening to Triple H about pushing his boys from NXT. Finn was a surefire star, and judging by his size and stature, Vince had to be talked into pushing him. Vince was probably like, damn it, Hunter, I'll give him a shot. And then he got injured, and the rest is history. Finn never sniffed the main event scene again while Vince was in charge. Look, I just don't get what the hype was about 2016. The 2016 Royal Rumble was horrible. We got a one versus all storyline with Roman that no one wanted, which resulted in Triple H being WWE champion at what, like 52? WrestleMania 32 was also bad, but they sold 100,000 seats in Dallas, further proving that WrestleMania could sell off its brand name alone. I know 32 was bad mostly because of injuries to guys like Cena, Rollins, and Wyatt, but still, WrestleMania 32 was bad, bro. That Brock Lesnar versus Dean Ambrose match was so bad that WWE thought Dean was just lazy. Roman versus Triple H was not exciting and resulted in Reigns getting booed after winning the WWE title. Just the result you want, the babyface champion getting booed to close WrestleMania. Then there was the botched storyline of Shane McMahon's return. Shane returned and Vince told him that if he beat The Undertaker at WrestleMania, he'd gain control of Raw. Again, this felt like something new and exciting. Finally a change in direction and a fun storyline. I watch wrestling still every week as a 20-year-old man anxiously awaiting for something exciting to happen. I thought we'd get it in 2011 with Punk, nope. Then I thought we'd get it with Bryan in 2014 and he got injured. But finally, here it was with Shane. And then Shane lost a match to Taker after nearly killing himself by jumping off the Hell in a Cell. He would later reveal in Vince's Netflix documentary that he did this for his father's affection. How sweet. There goes the new, exciting storyline. Gone. Out the window. But then Vince gave Shane control of SmackDown anyway? I don't know. Go figure. which did lead to good content for about 6 months until eventually Shane's creativity went off the rails, which eventually saw him become the best in the world and a bunch of other nonsense involved with Shane. Now, before I go deep into the awfulness that was at the end of the 2010s, let's take a detour and talk about the structure of WWE's programming during this time. For me, and I know I speak for a lot of other fans when I say this, the number one thing I did not like about the PG era was feeling like watching Raw and SmackDown was a chore. The 3-hour episodes of Raw started in July of 2012, and man, those shows felt lifeless, and like they drag on forever. Even before the start of the 3-hour Raws, Raw was going downhill and fast once turning PG. 2-hour shows were starting to feel like marathons, and every week felt like the same show. When you see Randy Orton versus Sheamus for the 100th time, or Alberto Del Rio cutting the same promo about how he's rich for the millionth time, it just got boring. Del Rio and Sheamus were shoehorned in as top guys without very much going for them. Don't get me wrong, Sheamus is a great mid-card act, and I've loved his work for a while now. It's nothing against him, but he just wasn't top guy material in my opinion. Del Rio, on the other hand, don't get me started on that guy. He's a whole different story for a different video. The quality of WWE's weekly television during this time frame was nothing short of awful. Yeah, there were good spurts like the Yes Movement or the Summer of Punk, but the moments of greatness were few and far between. WWE trotted out a watered-down PG version of ECW. You know, ECW, where drunk guys and crazy men set each other on fire, had barbed-wired matches, and jumped off of balconies. That ECW. In the WWE version of ECW, we had Big Show and Kane as their champion, and Do-Rag Vince was even running around with the ECW title belt. And once WWE went full PG with ECW, it was just garbage. It was like a developmental brand that they didn't care about at all before getting rid of it. I vividly remember watching some all-time bad segments, like when the Muppets were the guest hosts of Raw, and they had backstage segments with Christian where he bullied members of the Muppets until Sheamus came to their aid. Stuff like this must have felt like a slap to the face to the fans who grew up watching Stone Cold beat Vince's ass, or Hulk Hogan and Macho Man come to blows over Miss Elizabeth. Like, I know the in-ring was not good in the 80s, but I'd rather have fun characters and soap opera-like TV versus decent matches and corny segments every single week. Fans who grew up watching Stone Cold's beer truck segment must have wanted to crawl into a hole and die after watching FTR shave their backs, or Drake Maverick piss his pants on live TV for absolutely no reason. Me, I grew up in the Ruthless Aggression era, where I was spoiled with the likes of Eddie Guerrero, Kurt Angle, and Batista. While it wasn't as great as the Attitude Era, it was certainly awesome in its own right. Having watched WWE go from being so good to so bad as I got older was tough to watch at points. When I was in elementary school and middle school, wrestling was cool, and it was still pretty fun. Everybody was talking about Jeff Hardy or Triple H or Edge. But by the time the PG era hit, you were considered a loser if you still liked wrestling. I was a closeted wrestling fan for a while, until it got so bad in 2010 that even I had to give up watching altogether. What did it for me was when we were treated to The Miz and Jack Swagger being the top champions in the company at around the same time. Swagger was on SmackDown and Miz on Raw. These guys just did not feel or look like stars. Most of my friends couldn't take them seriously, and neither could I. I couldn't defend those horrible coal mine and anonymous GM segments at the height of Michael Cole's insufferableness. Heel Cole praising Miz while Miz barely won a middle of the card match while he was WWE champion just wasn't riveting TV. I did come back to wrestling when the pipe bomb happened and checked out again once Punk returned as just another guy. However, WrestleMania 28 brought me back for good, and aside from a few insufferable years from 2017 to 2019, I've been watching wrestling steadily ever since. Now that WWE is becoming cool again, it is great to see. I love the idea of attending a pay-per-view, like the Royal Rumble in St. Petersburg this year. It was night and day compared to when I went to WrestleMania 33 in Orlando. That show felt like a marathon, as it started at 5 p.m. and didn't end until after midnight the next day. Roman Reigns made his entrance just before midnight for his match with Taker, if I remember correctly. I sat outside in the blistering heat of the Orlando, Florida sun for over 8 hours for absolutely no reason. There was no need to have an 8-hour WrestleMania. These unnecessarily long pay-per-views became a staple of the PG era, as SummerSlam and even Royal Rumble were at times 5 to 6 hour marathons. Regular pay-per-views like Great Balls of Fire and Crown Jewel felt like they dragged on forever too. How could I forget those pointless pre-show matches too? There was like a 2-hour pre-show with 3 matches before every pay-per-view, and every pay-per-view had to have at least 7 matches. It was beyond the point of oversaturation. It was too much wrestling to comprehend. To follow all of these stories, you had to watch 205 Live, NXT, SmackDown, and Raw, not to mention social media exclusive content. That's like 15 hours of wrestling a week, and more if there was a pay-per-view that week. For me, the WrestleMania that I sat through for 8 hours, WrestleMania 33, is a perfect summary of what the PG era was. There was some shockingly good stuff like AJ Styles versus Shane to open the show. Then there was a lot of average or bad in between like KO versus Jericho and John Cena proposing to Nikki Bella, with an awesome moment sprinkled in with the Hardy Boys' return, followed by worse in Randy Orton versus Bray Wyatt and Roman Reigns versus The Undertaker. Alright, let's get to the creme de la creme of bad wrestling, and that is WWE from 2018 to 2019. I mean, to me, this was worse than the New Generation era from 93 to 96 in my opinion. This was horrible. This was probably the ugliest period of on-screen content WWE has ever had. We had Seth Rollins be the man's man, where he was basically a simp to his wife Becky Lynch. You had Drake Maverick piss himself live on Raw, you had FTR shave their backs on camera, you had Dean Ambrose receive injections in his buttocks. Now if you thought that was bad, Ambrose also said this to Reigns in regard to his leukemia coming back.
We're all gonna get what we deserve. I mean, look at Roman.
Yeah bro, this was awful. I legitimately could not watch wrestling after this. The moment that drove me away, and it's getting me hot just thinking about it, was when Seth Rollins got disqualified in a Hell in a Cell match for hitting The Fiend with the hammer or whatever the hell that was. Like bro, how do you get disqualified in a Hell in a Cell match? How did we go from all-time classics like Mick Foley getting thrown off the top of the cell by Undertaker to this? It was unbelievable. It was downright terrible. People were chanting AEW, we want refunds, cancel the network, you name it. On top of that, Baron Corbin was over pushed and was like basically prime Stone Cold during this time. He was in 3 segments a night it felt like as the Constable. Everything he did lacked charisma. I can't believe that man is the man who had the honor and privilege of retiring Kurt Angle. It's disgusting. I could go on and on and on, but you get it. This time frame was bad. So bad that we were given arguably 2 of the worst WrestleMania events of all time in back-to-back years, in WrestleMania 34 and WrestleMania 35. Hell, this time frame was so bad that a wrestling company was literally born in 2019. AEW was literally born because wrestling fans were sick of how bad WWE was. Let that sink in. Brock Lesnar versus Roman 2 at WrestleMania 34 was so bad that Brock shoot through the WWE Championship belt at Vince's head after Vince basically forced him to retain the title. Brock literally just wanted to go home, far away from this crap. 35 on the other hand was way too long and was home to the forced triple threat women's match that completely took away Becky's momentum. Charlotte being added into the triple threat match with her and Ronda was the most disliked video on WWE's YouTube channel up until The Rock took Cody's spot at WrestleMania 40. At least they pivoted at 40 and gave us final boss Rock. Instead, at 35, we had to watch Charlotte descend into New York City in a helicopter after midnight during an 8-hour WrestleMania. To me, the PG era that we once knew came to an end during COVID, and the era we're in now that began with the Tribal Chief has been known as the Renaissance era, I think by some. I'm not really sure what to call it, but thankfully, this god-awful era of the PG era is behind us. What's your favorite moments from the PG era? For me, the Yes Movement is up there, and the Pipe Bomb of course, but one thing I really liked was AJ Styles and John Cena's feud from 2016 to 2017. And what's your least favorite moments from the PG era? I think for me it's that era when the segments just became so insufferable that I was embarrassed to tell people I was even watching wrestling. Watching Goldberg nearly kill Undertaker, Cain Velasquez having a match against Brock, that was all bad. But there were some highlights, and some of the other highlights that I didn't mention were John Cena's US title open challenge and the rise of NXT. NXT was actually phenomenal during this time. They regularly put on better shows than the main roster during the peak of the TakeOver era. Nakamura, Bobby Roode, Finn Balor, Bayley, and Sasha, just to name a few of the great stars from that time. Man, take me back to that era of NXT. Before I get out of here, I'll ask you, was the PG era that bad in your opinion? Was I too harsh or not harsh enough? Or did I get it just right? Let me know. Thanks for watching.